Welcome to the Path to CPO, where we peel back the layers of success and delve into the journeys of the most dynamic Chief People Officers. I'm your host, Nelson Sibalingam, CEO and co-founder of How Now. Together, we'll explore the trials, the triumphs, and insights of these trailblazers across people, culture, and HR at some of the fastest growing companies in the world. This is not just their story, it's a roadmap for all aspiring people leaders. Tune in, rise up, and let's embark on this enlightening journey together. Ash, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to really kind of dive into your story because it's quite an eclectic and colourful one. Starting off with studying sound tech and music, going into sales trainer, and now VP of people. And so where do we start? Why don't we start with how did you go from studying sound tech and music to becoming a sales trainer? What happened there?
Oh, you're really going way back, aren't you? Yeah, it's eclectic is definitely the word. It's a real mixed bag for my past and sort of everything leading up to here and who knows what's next. But sound engineering was a real passion, music in general, just through school days and whether it's primary school, secondary school, even through A levels. Music and creativity was really where I lived, and that's where the grades were at the higher end of the scale as opposed to the other subjects. I enjoyed the sciences and maths and English and that kind of thing too, but I just didn't necessarily have a passion for it, and so music was where it was at. But I also had this love for technology in general, and bearing in mind this was some years ago, and so recording of music was still sort of big studios, and you wouldn't necessarily be able to do what you can do now with a laptop and a decent microphone at home. And technology's come on leaps and bounds, which is amazing for musicians today. So back then it felt quite intricate. There was lots to do, a combination of music and technology felt like a bit of an art form in itself. And so I got involved in that because I was good at it through school. That was kind of it. And then as university went on, and I really enjoyed the course and came out of university, and it wasn't. I can't say it was not necessarily a conscious choice to then move into sales. It was a bit of a moment of what am I going to do with my career? Like, where's this going to go? And so music technology remained there, music and technology and sound engineering and stuff that remained there. And I continued doing a few gigs and engineered at a few places and made some money from it, and had a sort of a couple of artists that I work with quite regularly that I really enjoyed and had some fun with that. And then it wasn't going big, let's put it that way. And so it's a case of, well, I've got to find something else to do as well. And let's ensure that I have options for my future. And so sales came along as kind of this opportunity. And in sales, it was sort of property sales to begin with, in a estate agency, sort of very typical start to that sales career. And then I moved into recruitment because the property crash happened in 2008-ish, and so recruitment felt like the next natural step. And recruitment was where I got my first taste of management, which I loved, and it was still quite early in my career. And I felt I really really enjoy this, sort of working with others, but not just as a peer group, but as a team. And I really enjoyed that sort of experience. And then recruitment kind of led me to understanding what technology sales meant, and that was my move into tech. So I moved to a digital marketing agency as a salesperson, and really really enjoyed that. But there was something missing, and when I reflect on it, I kind of realized this. But at the moment, it just felt a bit empty. I think, and it felt a bit like, well, what am I going to do next? There's always that "what am I going to do next" feeling. When I reflect on it now, it was kind of this feeling of there's got to be more to this. And I didn't seem to be motivated by sales in the same way that my peer group were motivated. And whether I hit target or not, I kind of felt the same. And while everyone else was ecstatic if they hit target, and I thought, there's something going on here. Couldn't quite put my finger on it though. And then it kind of dawned on me that I was always thinking about, there's something more to, there's something deeper to this on the sales side of things. And I was like, well, there's a psychology to selling, and I started reading books around that. And then I decided, well, actually, let me go and study psychotherapy and psychology just to understand this a little bit more. And it's a real impulsive, Googled it, found a place. And then, a week later, I'm just like studying part-time. And I really enjoyed that. And I ended up then specializing in hypnotherapy, very impulsive thing to do, but kind of one thing led to another. And I realized at that point that it was all about how people make decisions, the makeup of personalities, and the psychology of decision making that I loved, as opposed to selling. And so when a sales training opportunity came up, and I had people around me who supported me, like my manager at the time and some colleagues at the time, and they helped me sort of, get this opportunity to do it. Suddenly I was a sales trainer. But I felt it was quite different in that I sort of took a psychological approach to it as opposed to just, sales experience. So
the first question,
yeah,
I was going to say, Ash, the first question is, do you still make music?
No, unfortunately, I don't.
Have you got like a pseudo name where you're still performing?
I wish that was the case, and I've just sort of this other personality, like a Ron Swanson-esque from Parks and Rec. That'd be great, but no, I don't. I do still play my instruments very occasionally, but no, unfortunately not. I don't make much music.
I guess just taking you back to that point before you made that decision to try out sales, right? It's always a hard one to know when to stop, right? Even when you know something's not working, sometimes we feel like it's easier to just kind of keep going. There's a kind of comfort of sticking with what you're doing and seeing whether it would gradually get better. When you look back, what do you think helped you make the decision to go, actually, no, I do need to draw the line and make a decision here to go try out something else like sales?
As in from moving from music into sales?
Yeah.
I don't think it was anything in particular, I've got to say. I don't think there was a moment or a particular instance that said, right, it's time to move on or time to look at something different. It was definitely a combination of events. I think this happens with a lot of, I'm going to go into the psychology of it, I'm sorry. I think this happens with a lot of us, right? That in the moment, it's sort of a series of small events and micro decisions and conversations with people, and maybe even where we happen to be at the time, that sort of leads us down in a particular way. And if we're at a fork in the road, what's surrounding us at that point in time will encourage us to go one way or another. And if it happened to be a different day, we may have gone the other way. But then when we look back on it, we kind of have a lot of confirmation bias behind us that, is that particular thing, or is that particular moment, or, I made this conscious decision when it never really was. And I think I firmly fit into that camp where it was just these series of things that led me towards one day deciding that actually, let me go and look at a career elsewhere and see what also comes of that, because I'm not going to stop my music stuff, but I am going to give myself options. And at the time, being early in my career and enjoying this idea of selling and being a salesperson in especially in London, where there's lots of positivity around it, and it was a career path to the whole sort of thing. I thought, where do I start? An estate agency was where you started. So it was, well, let's go and get myself a job at an estate agent and let's get cracking,
Yeah. How did you find kind of formally studying the psychology of things? How did that help you with the kind of being a sales trainer? Did it help in any way? And if it did, how did you think it helped?
Yeah, it helped so much. And it was twofold. So one, it helped me understand my own psychology so much more than I had appreciated that I didn't understand my own psychology. So the level of self-awareness was brilliant, just that constantly growing. And since then, I've always been in this state of the most important thing to learn about is yourself. And so constant self-development, I think, is a huge, huge part there. And then being able to reflect that upon other people and sort of, not just sales trained via the process to follow and the script that you need to read and, all those kinds of things. It was more, I was able to bring more of an angle to it around from the perspective of who you're sat in front of and who you are two psychologies meeting. So what is it about these psychologies, these personalities, the environment and the conversation that you're going to have that's going to lead towards an outcome that works for both of you? Because that's ultimately how a decision is made. It's not necessarily about what's on the contract and what the price is and which company you represent and all the rest of it. A relationship is at the core of all of that, and that's what became really intriguing for me around psychology being such a big part of sales training, as opposed to it just being sales training, around a script and tactics and tips and tricks.
Just really curious around the self-awareness bits. I'm often found talking about the fact that it's probably one of the key traits I respect and admire and appreciate in people. And it's a trait that I value when I'm looking for. I think self-awareness is probably the beginning of many, many other things. What helped you develop that self-awareness? What in particular about going through that training helped you develop that self-awareness and the appreciation for it?
I think it started with an awareness of that my own decisions that I'm making and the things that I decide to do and the way I go about things is not just what I'm consciously thinking about. It's rooted in, potentially even my DNA and how I've been brought up and the conditions within which and the people I know, and possibly most importantly in recent as you grow up and sort of go through your career, who you're surrounded by, and what's shown to you as normal ends up conditioning you and who you decide to then become as well. So as all of those sort of factors and layers started sort of dawning on me as reasons why I am who I am, that led me to realize how much more there is I don't know about myself. So that real kind of self-analysis started to kick in, and then that realization of, well, imagine how many other people could feel better about not just feel better about themselves, but unlock higher potential in themselves by going through some of this awareness as well. So the first realization being very internal, and then sort of being of that personality that wanted to help people, thinking about how this could also then help others. And that, I think, was the start, and not wanting to sort of jump ahead too much here, but I think that was without me realizing at the beginnings of me sort of entering the people space. Because of that point, that moment in time where I thought, I can help others with this. This matters. Yeah.
Which is a good segue for us to move into your kind of next big chapter, as you said, stepping into the people space, and obviously the long stint that you did at Trustpilot, going from strength to strength, starting from L&D to kind of leading that talent function. But the first thing I want to start with is, what surprised you about the people space? So going in, you just come into sales, you became a trainer, and now you're going into the people space. What surprised you?
That's a really good question. I think one of the biggest surprises along the way has been sometimes how easy it is to disconnect from the commercial side of the business. Right. I think there's a lot of historic, or maybe not historic, but I think there's a lot of tradition in HR, and the people space arguably, but HR more so, that's almost this separate entity within the business from the commercial side of the business. And it's sort of, processes and structures as opposed to going out there and winning business. And I think that surprised me. So with the commercial background I've got, I always saw the two intertwined. It's like you can't have one without the other. And going from sales training to being involved in L&D more broadly, and then sort of leadership development and coaching, and then overall overseeing a talent function, I could never see the two as disconnected. But I just heard from so many others in I guess the industry, in sort of the people space, that these two things seem to exist very independently of each other, and that surprised me, and it still surprises me now actually when I hear conversations or involved in conversations that feel those two things are so disconnected.
And when you started in that L&D role, was it always on your kind of horizon to be the head of that talent function? Was that the trajectory you were on?
No, not really. I mean, I remember saying out loud, not that long ago, that I'm in the talent space now, and have I pigeonholed myself? Is this it? And it was almost a small fear that I've kind of pigeonholed myself, and I'm now in a one-lane race, and there's nowhere else I can really go. And I didn't really know what else it is I was trying to focus on, but I was concerned that I'd cornered myself a little bit. So that I've never really had this sort of vision of, I'm going to be, VP of people at a tech company at some point in the future, or chief people officer, or head of whatever it might be. It was never along those lines. I think it kind of goes back to what I said a little bit earlier around the series of events, people, and experiences that sort of come together over time, where you look back and realize that you are where you are, as opposed to trying to get to it. So it's been more of a byproduct of my experiences and relationships, and sort of smaller decisions, as opposed to something I've sort of, focused on and gone for.
And when you look back, has your perspective on L&D changed now that you're a VP of people, as opposed to what it was like when you were in L&D itself? Right? Has anything about it changed? Do you think it's more important, less important, or in any other way, has your perception of L&D and its role within a company changed?
Yeah, it has. It definitely has. I think when I was in the thick of it, as a facilitator with a team, out there making things happen and making the change happen, and really focused on delivery of L&D initiatives, the importance hasn't changed at all. If anything, I think the importance is increasing. It's definitely not decreasing. But my perspective on it is probably what's different. So, being there as the leader of an L&D team and sort of leading change hands-on as a facilitator, across multiple workshops and countries and teams, etc. You're really close to the action. You can feel the change happening. You can hear the conversations where new language is being used, maybe, or a new framework or a new structure, and you can sort of see the results of your work, and even hearing from managers and leaders who come to you and say, I did this and that really worked, or can you help me in this particular situation? And you're there in the moment. I think as a VP people, or just as a more senior person who's maybe more on the strategic side, it's easy to forget about those experiences, and it's easy to not see the impact of that hard work in facilitation and being there and making the change happen, and looking at numbers instead, and therefore sort of drawing conclusions about L&D from numbers and reports, as opposed to hearing it live and in action and understanding L&D from the people. And I think that perspective shift is really good to think strategically, but it can also diminish a bit of value that comes from L&D in the moment. And
right.
Those people who are impacted by it, they won't necessarily talk about the impact of that workshop every single day.
Yeah.
But the behavior change will be there constantly.
Yeah. It's one of the age-old challenges of L&D, right? Demonstrating impact to the rest of the business. But just coming back to, I guess, your trajectory on your way to becoming VP of people, that switch from L&D to leading the talent function, what did you do to build the skills that you needed to take on that role? Right? How are you going about building that skill and knowledge that you needed?
Yeah, it was a bit daunting, I've got to say, because it was a pretty big recruitment function that I was overseeing quite quickly. I understood it well in that I'd been a Trustpilot for a while, and so I knew the people well, and I felt I had some good relationships, which obviously all really helped, and a great leader as well, who really helped me to see the strategic side of things and helped me to make some very constructive decisions. But the daunting part was not understanding the day jobs of most of my team, not understanding the intricacies of what they were challenged with day to day. What was really good about that, though, is that it forced me to be a coach, because I couldn't mentor them. And I think that was a really healthy thing for them and for me, because it helped me to understand their roles better, but also it helped, I from looking back now, it really helped me to be a leader as opposed to a supervisor or a manager of their work, and therefore decisions were made by them for them. And I was more so focused on sort of the strategic side of things. So yeah, that it felt like a bit of a leap, and there was definitely a gap there. I mean, I had recruited for a few years and managed a recruitment team, so that stuff helped, but that was on the agency side, and it was many years prior. So, that was helpful, but not necessarily everything I needed to be the right leader. But things snapped into place quite quickly, I feel. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were challenges along the way. But the most important thing to making that piece work at the time was my leader at the time and the people that were on my team, who were just very good at what they did. And then it was a matter of aligning a strategy with where we needed to go as a business and ensuring that, the right things followed from the team. So
I really love what you said there, Ash, around you didn't think you can mentor them, so you decided to coach them, right? And often I find some people use those two words interchangeably, mentoring and coaching, but there is obviously a fine difference between them. Would you share from your perspective what you see the differences in both of those approaches?
Yeah, of course. I think as a manager who's been there and done the job of their direct reports, it's very easy to be a mentor because you've been there and done it, and you've probably seen the challenges that they're coming up against for the first time. And so it's really easy and I almost think of it as a bit of a mentor trap sometimes, because it's easy to swoop in and say, here's how I handled it, here's how to overcome this challenge, I've done it 3 times, and it can really help that person overcome that challenge at the time. But what they won't necessarily get from that is the experience you had of having to overcome that challenge on your own, maybe, and come to your own conclusions and make your own recommendations and take your own risks. And, a lot of the time, and many businesses at the moment, they don't have the time for risks. And especially in this sort of era of efficiency as well, risk is not a word that's flying around much. But I think being a coach, when you're forced to be a coach, like I was, because I couldn't be a mentor to these people, it forced me to really exercise that coaching muscle and ask the right questions to help them to come to conclusions that were going to help us really get to the strategy. By pulling on their specialism, by asking them to think about breaking a challenge down into specific outcomes, and asking how they would overcome this particular very small particular challenge, and then throw it to the team and workshop it and facilitate it, and then the outcome, or the way to get to the outcome that felt the most productive for where we were as a business and where we needed to go was the one we went with, and we'd give it a go. But everyone had their say, everyone had their input, and I always saw it as I'm facilitating the specialists. I don't have the answers, but I can ask the right questions. So it's important to be both. To if you can be both, it's important to be both. But if you had to be one, I would say be a coach.
Was there ever a moment there when you don't recognize yourself as an expert in that area? It's easy for kind of, I guess, imposter syndrome or doubt, and whether, am I the right person to lead and manage these people when I'm not the expert in this topic? Did you ever have those moments, and how do you deal with that?
All the time. All the time. And definitely in that phase where I oversaw the talent team, it was, like I said, it's a big team, it was multinational, there's a lot of responsibility on the team as well, and I felt I fell out of my depth. And similarly, when I joined Mention Me in my most recent role, in my current role, it was my first executive level role, and being responsible to the CEO and to a board, etc. It's the first time having that experience, and the imposter syndrome was real. I really felt it there, and it was almost not knowing. I felt very uncomfortable not knowing the answers. And this is something that previous managers, spent a lot of time working with me on when she coached me, was, not having the answer all the time is a good thing. And that's actually one of my big lessons from that I sort of take from those experiences. But yeah, the imposter syndrome has definitely been real in a few of these instances. But getting comfortable with not having the answer is definitely what helps me through that.
And so, like you said, you've been about a year and a half in the role of VP at People, am I right?
That's right, yeah.
Right. What do you know now that you wish you knew when you started that role?
What do I wish I knew then? It's going to sound a bit of a cop-out, but I think it'd be cheating if I took something back in time. Because I think there's... I think those experiences and the imposter syndrome is necessary to grow. So if I knew some of the stuff I know now, if I knew some of that then, it wouldn't have been as much of a challenge for me. I wouldn't have had to push myself as much. I wouldn't have had to overcome as much. I wouldn't have had to go asking, people in my peer group and network particular questions to help me along the way. I wouldn't have had to, call on my manager to help me overcome a challenge, or to coach me through something, or to be a mentor for me. And none of that would have happened. And all of that led to relationships being built and me building my profile and my credibility. So I think it's all necessary.
So one last bit of advice from you, Ash, for someone who's on their own journey or path to becoming a VP of People. What's that one bit of wisdom that you'd like to share with them?
I think the most important thing I feel, just from my experience so far, is not having all the answers and getting comfortable with that and almost welcoming it. So I think having the ability to facilitate the answer through having engaging conversations with others across a challenge or a task or whatever it might be is going to be where relationships are built, trust is built, the right answer is found, people coming together to find a solution, and your profile as someone that gets to the answer gets built. And it's also where creativity forms, because you've got people around you with diverse thinking, etc., and all sorts of solutions being thrown at you, and new ideas are formed as well. So I would say, where there's imposter syndrome, for example, or where there's uncertainty, or where there's that feeling of, is this too big for me, or I haven't done this yet, use that as your way to bring others in to facilitate your way through it. The outcome of that is going to be way bigger than, the answer to any question, or, any kind of outcome you could look for. You're going to get so many fringe benefits from it. So I'd say that's the big takeaway.
Actually, I lied. I've got one more question for you. I have to ask you this because in preparation for this chat, I was going through your LinkedIn testimonials, reviews, whatever you call them, and I'm just going to read a little bit out, which was, quote, "Best L&D pro I've ever worked with," was what was written in one of your testimonials. And I'm always amazed. I get a real joy seeing people who are really good at what they do. I often describe it as people having their Federer moment, right? And anyone having their Federer moment is a real joy to watch. And so I wanted to understand, what did you do to make someone feel you were the best L&D pro they've ever worked with?
I can't remember who that was, and I'm sure it was from many years ago. I still really appreciate it, obviously. In that instance, I don't know. I think my approach to L&D hasn't changed too much over the years. But yeah, so I think what sorry, I'm just thinking about this one. Yeah, okay. So I think on the L&D facilitation side, especially, I think what's really important, and I think why maybe people might have thought along those lines, and when I facilitated sessions, is giving people the ability to not just practice something, but to have accomplished something in every workshop or session that they attend. So they walk away feeling as though they've done something new, and It's not necessarily just through a practice or a role play or a scenario. It's they've done it for real. So if you've done it for real once, you're going to do it for real again, and if you've seen value from it. And I try to stick to that with every facilitation I do. It's not always possible, but when it does work, I feel the impact's huge.
Ash, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
No worries. Thank you, Nelson. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to another brilliant episode of L&D Disrupt, the podcast that's powered by How Now. Our learning experience platform helps companies bring relevant learning and skills into the flow of work to make meaningful learning a part of everyday work. But don't just take our word for it. Here's what some of our customers have to say. And if you like what you hear and want to learn more about How Now, just use the link in the description to book a demo. As a loyal L&D Disrupt listener, we'll send you a swag pack containing a copy of the book Learning at Speed and some How Now merch once we've shown you around.
And we needed somewhere to have a central home for all of the learning content that was being created at pace. And we also really wanted to support a modernised learning. So moving to that 70-20-10 model, where learning is really integrated into the flow of work at the point of need. And we knew that How Now would be the perfect platform to support with that modernised approach.
And I was confident that How Now was right for FitFlop because it passed the eyeball test at the Learning Technologies Conference, number one. Does it look like it's going to be user-friendly and people might actually want to use it? In my previous companies, I'm used to using very clunky LMSs that don't do much to help with engagement.
We've just launched How Now, actually, where I am at the moment with Lucid Group, and what we've focused on is the building of habits around learning. So trying to get people into healthy and regular habit of learning so that it becomes an everyday activity as opposed to something they have to take lots of time out. We're very time poor. The tools they've got, the information they need is where they need it at the point. So integrating into Microsoft Teams as we use it, or any other collaboration tool, making sure that any learning is accessible at their point of need. So where they can ask a search first question and then we can provide them the information they need straight away.